Despite a significant decline, the number of corona cases in Great Britain is still high. Nevertheless, Prime Minister Johnson considers the pandemic to be over. First of all, proof of vaccination and the obligation to wear masks, and later even isolation, should be completely eliminated. It wouldn't exist with the flu either. Amid the lockdown party scandal, British Prime Minister Johnson has announced the lifting of most lockdown measures in England. Yeah, smokescreen, we all know that. From January 27, wearing masks will no longer be required by law, Johnson said in the British House of Commons. Since corona is becoming endemic, we have to replace the legal obligations with advice and recommendations, said the British Prime Minister. From tomorrow, we will no longer require masks in classrooms, said the Conservative politician. The whole argument is correct, but not at this time. Working from home is also no longer officially recommended. From now on, the government is no longer calling for people to work from home, he said. The vaccination certificates, hated by parts of the Tory party, against which a number of MPs rebelled in December, almost 100, should also be a thing of the past from the middle of next week. The presentation of the health card in clubs and at certain large gatherings has so far been mandatory. The government plans to end isolation for people who have tested positive. Well, it's planned for March. We don't legally force people to isolate themselves when they have the flu, Johnson said. Due to the extraordinary booster campaign, the measures could expire. Just a few days ago, his government reduced the isolation to 5 full days. Johnson had already announced a Freedom Day and the lifting of almost all protective measures in July. And from autumn, a new wave of corona brought the clinics to the brink of collapse, and they're not that far away from that yet. While hospitals in northern England remain under heavy strain, in other parts of England, the number of hospital admissions and intensive care patients has stabilized or is falling, Johnson said. Access to major events without a corona pass is therefore permitted again. The mask requirement in schools, as I said, will also be removed immediately. Scotland and Wales also announced easing. The announcement of the easing of corona measures now comes earlier than expected and at a time when Johnson needs positive coverage. And he doesn't care about the health of people, he needs that news now. Actually, the rules should not be reviewed until next week. In the UK, each part of the country decides its own health policy. The Scottish government announced on Tuesday that it would lift most of the existing restrictions from next Monday, and I believe also, Nicola, I'm sorry, but that's too early. This means that nightclubs, among other things, are also allowed to reopen. Okay, they are. Yeah, Wales announced similar moves last week. In the UK, 152,000 people have died from COVID-19 since the pandemic began. With the emergence of the Omicron variant, the number of new daily infections in the UK peaked at 200,000 in early January, but has since fallen to less than half, but it's still almost 100,000. Meanwhile, Johnson is facing more and more headwind from within his own ranks, and that's the whole reason for this. In a tumultuous debate in Parliament, former Brexit Secretary David Davis called on him to resign. In the name of God, go, he said. He defended Johnson for weeks for his services to Brexit and the corona crisis, but he also expects members of the government to take responsibility for their actions, something Johnson has never done. The head of government has been hit by various scandals for weeks, including parties during the corona lockdown. More and more Conservatives are criticizing him. According to media reports, Johnson is facing an internal party revolt. Johnson ruled out immediate consequences from the Partygate scandal. He will just await the report of an internal investigation due this week, next week, he said in Parliament. Once again, the Prime Minister dodged specific questions about the cause of lockdown parties at the seat of government. Well, he usually doesn't answer PMQs, so why should he now? Opposition leader Keir Starmer has to wait for the investigation report, says Johnson. After he had recently shown remorse, well, the Prime Minister remorse for being caught, who was threatened with a vote of no confidence in his own ranks, now showed himself combative and sharply attacked his political opponent. If Starmer had his way, the country would still be in lockdown, Johnson claimed. Thanks to his policies, however, Great Britain came through the pandemic economically well. Yeah, and the people's lives worse than in most of the rest of Europe. Following the latest revelations, 20 Conservative MPs met to discuss a no-confidence vote in Johnson ahead of the PMQs on Wednesday. And shortly before the debate, it was announced that a Tory MP was moving to the Labour Party. Christian Wakeford, who had voiced his distrust in Johnson, was greeted with loud cheers and slaps on the back from his new colleagues. There were boos from the government bank, of course. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.